The monsters in Silent Hill F might be varying levels of creepy, scary, and, well, weird, but they all represent something more. Like in other Silent Hill games, the monsters we have to overcome are manifestations of the main character's psyche, each one a metaphor for Hinako's thoughts, emotions, and, more importantly, her fears. So today I'm going to explain each of these monsters, what they really represent, and how they give us hints to the true story of Silent Hill F. Before we can really understand these monsters, we need to understand what the story of Silent Hill F is. In its most basic sense, this is a story about a young girl coming to terms with the end of her childhood and the prospect of losing her freedom. Shimizu Hinako is a teenage girl in a small mountain town in 1960s Japan. She spends a lot of her free time with her three best friends, Rinko, Sakoko, and Shu. Hinako and Shu have a complicated relationship. They call each other Aibo, which means partner in Japanese, and the two have a very strong bond, often hanging out to play games together. This is where a large part of the internal conflict within Hinako begins. Rinko has clear romantic feelings for Shu, something that has led to tension between her and Hinako. Despite adamantly claiming that she doesn't have romantic feelings for Shu, that her feelings for him are purely platonic, and despite giving her blessings to Sakoko to pursue her own feelings, Hinako clearly fears losing her Aibo. If these two were to begin dating, that would likely end the partnership that they have. Rinko also feels jealous of the strong bond that Hinako and Shu have, a bond that she wishes for herself. A lot of this jealousy probably stems from the fact that Hinako and Shu are far more compatible in terms of personality. Hinako is often described as a tomboy, something that was incredibly frowned upon in this time period, where women were expected to get married, have children, and be homemakers. Shu was one of the few people who truly accepted Hinako, and this is where Hinako's love for Shu stems from. It's a pure and innocent type of love. But this is where the true conflict within Hinako arises. Despite her young age, Hinako has received a marriage proposal from a man named Tsuneki Kotoyuki, the heir to the Tsuneki clan. Hinako saved Kotoyuki from a fox when they were younger. This is why he is represented by the fox in both mask and sigil. After moving away, Kotoyuki returned years later and proposed a marriage between the two. This is something that both Hinako's parents and older sister have been strongly encouraging. This man comes from an incredibly wealthy family, meaning Hinako and presumably her family wouldn't have to worry about money for the rest of their lives. As women of the time were expected to find a suitable partner, this would be a dream for most women, or so you would think. This is the key to understanding everything in Silent Hill F, including all of the monsters. Just like every other Silent Hill game, Silent Hill F takes place as two worlds collide, the normal world and the other world. Each world has its own setting, its own monsters, and its own Hinako. The Hinako from the human world is represented by the white bird, the bird who wants to keep its innocence, its purity. This Hinako wants to remain young and free, wants to hang out with her friends and her Aibo, drink ramune and play games. The Hinako from the other world knows that in many ways marrying Kotoyuki is a great choice. He's a handsome young man with a sizable fortune. He would provide a great name and potentially a great future. This is why she is represented by the blackbird. She represents growing up, becoming a woman, and losing that childhood innocence. The entire game of Silent Hill F is a conflict between these two Hinakos. They both believe that neither can exist while the other one lives. In order to remain as she is, Hinako would need to reject the marriage proposal, killing her potential future. But accepting the marriage proposal would end her life as she knows it. Everything would change. Metaphorically, she would be killing her childhood self. This fundamental conflict is baked into the design of the monsters throughout the game. But it's not just this conflict, it's also Hinako's own personal fears and trauma. Of course, there is also the conflict between the two gods, which serves as a parallel between the conflict of the two Hinakos. This fight too is between a god of the past, one that wants to stay the same, and one of the future, one that represents change. Now that you understand the basic frame of the story, you are ready to understand the monsters that inhabit it. Probably the most iconic monsters in Silent Hill F are the Ayakashi. These are the creepy monsters you find in the fields who look like a mix between scarecrows and school students. But these enemies are both steeped in symbolism while also concealing an incredibly dark hidden meaning. These enemies resembling scarecrows is no coincidence. Scarecrows are designed to, well, do just that, scare birds and keep them away from growing crops. Well, Hinako, being represented by the bird, shows that these enemies are born from her fears. This is the reason why they look like her fellow students. These enemies carry scythes but will often only move when you are not looking at them. They will quite literally try to stab you in the back. This is something Hinako has experienced from both her friends and classmates. Many of the students have spoken about her relationship with Shi behind her back, often gossiping and speculating about their true intentions. Now that Hinako has received a marriage proposal from a wealthy man, that gossiping has only intensified. Of course, they are polite to her face, but the second her back is turned, they turn vicious, just like the Ayakashi. The scarecrow puzzle Hinako has to complete is also a hint to her relationship with Sakoko. The two had made an agreement. As best friends, they would do everything together and everything at the same time, including finding boyfriends. Now that Hinako has a marriage proposal, Sakoko calls her a traitor. This is likely banter between friends, but it shows how both of these young girls feel betrayed by the other. Sakoko now fears that her best friend is going to get married and leave her, which is why the otherworld Hinako does just that. Hinako, on the other hand, is frustrated that her best friend isn't supporting her. This is a very difficult decision for Hinako, and she is disappointed that Sakoko doesn't understand that. Sakoko had always struggled to make friends. This is why she is represented by the rabbit. She was even teased for liking rabbits more than people. But in reality, Sakoko struggled to make friends due to being autistic, something that wasn't as well known about or as accepted as it is today. This is likely why these enemies wear masks. This is a physical representation of the masking that Sakoko does on a daily basis, putting on her polite smile, as she calls it. Hinako, being a tomboy, was a similar outcast, so Hinako leaving her is heartbreaking for Sakoko. I think it's no coincidence that Sakoko is represented by the rabbit, a prey animal that in this metaphor is being killed by the fox. But as I said, the Ayakashi also hide a secret, darker hidden meaning. Their name gives us a big clue to this. The name is a combination of two words, Kakashi meaning scarecrow, but Ayakashi being a type of yokai. These yokai are spirits of those who died at sea, now vengeful, trying to get more people to join them. But the notes we find in-game tell us that many children have gone missing in this town, only to be later found dead after they fell into the waterway that runs through Ebisugaoka. Perhaps these Ayakashi are the ones pulling them in, or perhaps this is just a story that scares our little bird Hinako. These are without a doubt the most common enemies you will face in the game, and that's for a good reason. These enemies appear as women stripped of their clothes, holding kitchen knives and often ambushing our protagonist. Just like the previous monsters, their name and appearance give us huge hints to what they represent. The true ending of the game explains that what Hinako truly wants is some peace and quiet. She wants to be left alone to contemplate her future and the massive decision now facing her. All around her are people telling her what to do. Her family are telling her to get married, her friends are telling her to stay with them. All of this noise is making it hard for her to think. This is why the enemies in Silent Hill F are constantly loud, always screaming or bellowing. This is also what the F in Silent Hill F means. It's quite literally a musical note standing for forte or fortissimo, a note being played loudly. Kashimashi loosely translates to noisy, boisterous, or clamorous, and it comes from a Japanese phrase that translates to, when women gather, it is noisy. These enemies obviously represent the women of the town. As stated earlier, at the time, women were expected to become wives and raise a house. In many countries, not just Japan, this was seen as the ultimate duty of women. So, the women around the town would naturally tell Hinako to accept the marriage proposal. We even hear some women right at the start of the game gossiping about it. Although this gossip changes depending on how many times you finish the game and what ending you've just received. The Kashimashi holding kitchen knives is an obvious nod to the idea that women in this town are expected to run the household, yes, including the kitchen. But something you might not have noticed is that their feet resemble paws. Hinako views marrying Kotayuki as accepting the fox, After all, he is represented in the other world by the fox mask. So, these monsters having kitsune-like paws is a representation of them accepting their own marriage, and thus they chose the fox. It could be argued that the way these creatures move is also a nod to the idea that both of these women bend over backwards for their husbands, but also that they cannot stand on their own 2 feet. Their bodies being naked is a possible metaphor for how men could view them, but their joints being doll-like further reinforces the idea that they are designed to be played with and discarded at the whim of their owner. Many of them have lost their faces. They have quite literally become faceless. They have lost their identity, lost their family name, and now are only known as the wife of their husband. But it also might have a slightly deeper meaning. As we will come on to later, Hinako resents her father for being a loud, angry drunk, but she also resents her mother for looking the other way. Without eyes, these monsters look the other way when it comes to their husband's bad behaviors. Or so Hinako thinks. One thing is for certain though, these monsters don't see Hinako's point of view, and they will never see eye to eye. Now, we don't have an official name for these creatures as far as I know, but I think what they represent is very simple. I'm calling these creatures beasts because in many ways they are a metaphor for how men can be like beasts. These monsters are obviously much more masculine than the previous ones. They swing more wildly with more ferocity, leaping and charging at Hinako. Also, something that is pretty easy to overlook is that they actually can't see you, they can only hear you. If you are quiet, these enemies don't notice you. That in itself could be a metaphor for how many men of the time expected women to be quiet, not to complain or make a fuss. Their description though gives a much clearer clue. Hinako's notebook states that they have greedily staring eyes and greasy palms, and that they act all chummy with her. This is obviously a reference to how sometimes men will act very sweet to women they want to date, but while this can of course be genuine, sometimes this is just a front which disappears very quickly when rejected. But this negative view of men is something that comes from Hinako and her relationship with her father that we'll come onto later. The way this monster will lick Hinako when they grab her is clearly a reference to men who want to kiss her, but just like the Ayakashi, these beasts may stem from a local tale that Hinako has heard. Towards the later parts of the game, we can find one of these beasts that will stalk you through the forest, never attacking, just watching and waiting. Once we reach this room, we can find several dead Kashimashi, before being ambushed by one of the beasts. A note we find in this area tells a very dark tale of a man who lured women back to his home in the woods, and judging by how these monsters are laid out, combined with this note, implies that the women never left. Tales like this and Hinako's rocky relationship with her father explain why she views men in such a negative way. This is also why these beasts sound like dogs when Hinako attacks them. A slightly less subtle metaphor. Their faces are covered by flowers, which is likely another metaphor for how men don't actually see Hinako. They see nothing but the body or the usefulness, but they don't really see the person. Or again, in at least Hinako's point of view. The Amoy are a clumped mass of doll parts that, while not particularly threatening, are incredibly annoying. They constantly yell out, stunning Hinako and once again disturbing the quiet that she is seeking. Their name also gives us hints. Oi means hey or is an informal greeting, and Amoy meaning either heavyweight or feelings and emotions. Some people have suggested that this name means that this enemy represents the heavy weight of emotion that Hinako feels. Now, this enemy is one of several that have counterparts in the human world and otherworld. This enemy found in the otherworld is a direct counterpart to the one we can find in the human world. This one being made of dolls and crying like a baby is likely a hint towards Hinako's fears if she does accept the marriage proposal. If she marries Kotayuki, then she would be expected to become a mother. Dolls and crying would become normal parts of her daily life. Contrast this to the enemy in the human world. This enemy looks very similar, except this time it's a mass of adult faces that spew horrific liquids all over the place. This shows how human world Hinako, who wants to reject the marriage, fears the men more than she fears having children. Of course, this makes sense. If she rejects the marriage, she won't need to have them. But if she rejects the marriage, she would also anger her father. We know that her father is a heavy drinker, and so this enemy likely reflects what Hinako fears the most about each choice. This logic applies to these enemies too. This one is very similar to the beasts we see in the human world, except these ones appear to be chained. Since the otherworld Hinako wants to accept the marriage, this shows how she understands that in many ways the men are prisoners to customs and expectations too, being expected to provide for the family financially, offering safety, having children, all expectations placed upon men, just like having children and staying at home were expectations placed upon women. A huge theme of this game is Hinako believing that these two beliefs are mutually exclusive. The true ending is her accepting that, for example, men can be scary, dangerous even, but they are also prisoners to their own societal expectations and pressures. Both of these ideas can and do exist at the same time. The same theme is true for these enemies. The Kashimashi represent the women of the town encouraging Hinako to marry just as they did, whereas their counterpart in the other world is a representation of the rituals of marriage. Like all of the other named enemies, the Harai Katashiro hide clues in their name. Harai means to cleanse oneself of spiritual pollution, whereas Katashiro is a ritual doll that is used to transfer sins or impurities into themselves before they can be burnt or cast into a river. These names form an obvious parallel to Hinako. Not only does the otherworld Hinako have to cleanse herself of her more childish side, but she also, metaphorically, must get rid of her childhood friends. This ritual purification is what we see Hinako perform in the otherworld, and so these enemies can be seen as Hinako fighting against her more childish side. Each one defeated is a small part closer to Hinako accepting the ritual, and therefore the marriage. Their leg blades might also be a subtle hint towards the revelation from Hinako's mother on the true ending of the game. Shimizu Kimi explains that while Hinako believes that women become powerless, faceless, after marriage, the Kashimashi representing how they cannot even stand on their own 2 feet, but that in reality, women have a lot of power over their husbands. She explains that she had Hinako's father groveling at her feet after an argument. This could be a hint that married women still have power and represents Hinako's conflict of ideas once again. The hulking beasts, the Ara Abare, are some of the most powerful enemies in the game, and that makes complete sense when you learn that they are a representation of Hinako's father. They shout and spit from giant mouths in their stomach, something that represents Kanta's tendency to get drunk and shout. The giant knife they wield is a reference to the time he got so mad at Hinako that he threw a knife at the floor in front of her. He threw it so hard that it got lodged into the tatami mat. The Ara Abare, being the largest and most powerful enemy, shows how Hinako views her father as the biggest problem in her life. The name once again contains hints. The word Ara is used to denote surprise or exclaim, while Abare means to act violently or to rage. The name is obviously a clue to how Hinako views her father as a giant raging monster. But once again, this enemy has no apparent eyes, signifying how Hinako's father is blind to the damage he is causing. Now this is another enemy that as far as I know doesn't have an official name, but the symbolism for this one is clear. The monster is formed of 2 bodies intertwined, the topmost body full of grotesque growths that constantly birth disgusting sacks of flesh that grow into monsters. The symbolism at a surface level shows how Hinako views motherhood. She is disgusted by the idea of becoming pregnant, something that was expected of women of the time. Moreover, it's a metaphor for how monsters create more monsters. Trauma and negativity can often be passed down from generation to generation, something we learnt about Hinako's father in the true ending. While childbirth is a natural and in many ways beautiful process, it does take a huge toll on a woman's body. There is, yet again, another deeper clue here though. In the true ending, we learn that Hinako's mother Kimi had health complications with Hinako's birth. Kimi is now left needing to take medicine daily, and is even considering surgery to try and fix these problems. I'm sure this is another one of the reasons why the two were very happy at the prospect of Hinako becoming married. This explains why Hinako views childbirth as such a horrible thing, and why both Hinakos fear it. The Otherworld Hinako is starting to accept this duty though, which is why the Otherworld versions are slightly less corrupted than their human world counterparts. The monsters in Silent Hill F are all manifestations of Hinako's greatest fears. Loud, drunken men, giving up her freedom, being forced to become a mother. These are all quite literally her personal demons. No, I didn't mention the bosses or formidable foes as the game calls them, since they probably deserve their own video. We are rapidly running out of time until Little Nightmares 3 releases, but if you want me to analyze the formidable foes too, maybe leave the video a like. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.